The fourth episode of the new Disney Gallery The Mandalorian documentary is now up and ready to watch. And it's entirely about the new technology which is kind of the heir to rear projection, which is known as the volume, or formerly as Stagecraft. And frankly, it is impressive. And I'm going to break it all down for you after the intro. Well, hello there. My name's Jeremy and welcome back to Freeform Disney, where I talk about all aspects of Disney, from the animated movies to the theme parks to Star Wars, Marvel, and Pixar, and the TV shows, and everything else in between. And that is why it's Freeform. And keep coming back every day for new daily content. If you're not subscribed yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Hopefully everyone's having a good Friday today, and I've got to say, wow, I've really been looking forward to seeing more of the amazing new technology in The Mandalorian, and I knew the speculation was that this episode would be all about Stagecraft, which as I noted before is called the volume, and that's what they're going to refer to it here in this episode as throughout. And guess what? It turned out that is definitely what this episode is about, entirely. It's not about any other technology within it, it's just about the volume. And probably unsurprisingly, for anyone who knows that I geek out about technology, I thoroughly enjoyed this episode. For the first time in this episode, there were no new tables of people to talk. Just the three tables that we had from the first three episodes. So the one with the directors, the one with our different production and animation and visual effects people, and the one with the actors. But we did have two extra people pop in, and that was Baz, the director of photography, cinematographer for The Mandalorian, and also Giancarlo Esposito, who played Moff Gideon. So even today, our Mandalorian documentary universe still continues to expand. Well, with that, let's start diving on in and talking about the volume. Jon Favreau gets us started right off the bat by really talking about one of these misconceptions that a lot of people have, even within the industry sometimes, where you have that idea that, well, you can do anything later, special effects, technology, we can fix it all later, fix in post, paint it out, etc. Well, it's not really the case. And one of the major areas that there are real problems with that is interactive light or shadows. So if you don't have the shadows generated actually for real the way they should be at the time you're shooting it, it is a real pain later. Let alone if you have different light sources and how they're supposed to reflect onto different objects, because it's one piece after another that you have to fix to try to make it look right in post. And to be honest, on top of all that, that takes a heck of a lot of time and work, and it's part of why post-production takes so long. And it's also why you really avoid anything reflective if you're going ahead and using lots of green screens, because it's just that much more work to try to fix in the long run. From there, we went ahead and talked about a bunch of pre-Mandalorian stuff. So we got this talk from Jon Favreau talking about his work with Jungle Book and Lion King. Like in Jungle Book, where they did have some video wall panels, so they helped get some of the shadows that could go. And they built some patches of set to go ahead and make it so they had some real elements in there. Made it easier for the After Effects and putting everything in later. But that said, one of the big problems there is doing that you still have to do all kinds of work if you move a camera. You have to reset all of that blue screen. And so it ended up taking them a long time. And by the way, this is part of the problem with rear projection too. Rear projection works for a shot as long as you keep the camera exactly where it needs to be. You can't move that camera around or it's going to become really obvious really fast that it's a flat image. So Jon Favreau's next project after that was The Lion King. And there, they really tried pushing and going further with game engine technology in there, and were able to use VR to actually get inside the shots and be able to use their cameras virtually, which is pretty cool, actually. And so coming from those two experiences, and having worked with ILM a bit on Iron Man, and then also other people having been working on pushing the boundaries from all kinds of other directions, like it wasn't mentioned in this episode, but Rogue One also was pushing things as well and used a large screen and big LED screen to try to get some light from that screen to come in to help fix so you didn't have too much of the same problems, again, with that interactive light. So when they came to Mandalorian, well, Kathleen Kennedy talked with Jon Favreau, and they got to talking about what they were interested in doing, and looking at really being able to push those boundaries. And so they got together a group of ILM and a whole bunch of other people, and really everyone wanted to see what kind of innovations they could come up with, where they could push it to. And so they ended up putting together this big think tank. It was Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, Kathleen Kennedy, Richard Bluff, Rob Redo, a bunch of ILM people over at Unreal, etc., even more. And so a whole ton of people came together to go create the volume and make this whole thing work. And well, they sure as heck did make it work. Because you can't tell when you're watching The Mandalorian what is real and what isn't on that screen. It's bloody impressive. It really, really is. And all of that work led to The Mandalorian being the first production with real-time rendering and video wall in-camera set extensions and effects. Pretty dang impressive. And not just in one little spot either, but all around. Because the volume is a giant room of TV screens, and the ceiling also. It's a 75-foot diameter circle. It ends up using thousands of LED panels. And by the way, it's like 20 feet high, too. Now, that said, the ground is real in there. So there is some real elements, and also anything in front of those screens has to be real. So there are different set pieces that are certainly real and help merge the screen into the foreground that we get to see in front, and that the characters sometimes interact with, which is really cool. But can you tell where those differences are? Not necessarily. Certainly not from the camera's point of view. What makes this so special? What makes it work in a way that you couldn't just, hey, look, it's a screen with all kinds of stuff up there? Well, the problem is, a flat screen, if you move from one position to another, well, then your perspective doesn't change the way it would in real life. And that's because of two things. Both your perspective changes, and there is a parallax change too when you move. And parallax, for what it's worth, they put up a nice definition here for us, which is where the position or direction of an object will appear to be different when you view it from a different spot. So it's not just me changing my perspective, but also how that ends up changing what I'm seeing as well. And so to accomplish that, what happens is they also take the data from the camera itself as to what its position is, and then as the camera moves, the background itself will actually move as well. So as to work and create that perspective and parallax change right there in real time, which is really, really cool. I mean, they talk about things like how they can shoot, a 10 or 12 hour dawn, which is just crazy, or how you can change from completely different environments. Like you're in Tatooine at one point, and you could be over in Dagobah in the afternoon and shoot that. I mean, dang, it's just, it's crazy. Love it. Love it, love it. We had a number of them talk about the believability of what you're actually seeing. Heck, Dave Filoni describes it as like being inside the Battle of Hoth, but it's already pre-planned and it's happening all around you. Taika Waititi talks about how you sometimes forget where the screens actually are, because even to the human eye, it could be believable. Some of them had fun guessing what was actually real and what wasn't, where the screen was and what was actually in the foreground, what were those set pieces. Or, hey, there were a couple fun stories in there. One of the fun stories came from Richard Bluff, who talked about how they always come to the volume to prep for the next day. Usually having a conversation, working on that. And well, they had some images up on the background, and there was smoke in the background. Someone started shouting that there was a fire. But it was actually just on the screen. But it's that real that it can make you believe that, even there in person. Or also the story where Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau were having a talk with Disney people shooting from a distance, and they were in the volume at the time, and they weren't even thinking too deeply about it. But apparently nobody on the other side actually realized they were in the volume and that it wasn't just a massive set that they had built. I mean, you see the images of it. Heck, you've seen the show. You know how real the dang thing can look. It's just wow. And hey, all of this, think about the Mandalorian with that metal helmet that has so many reflective surfaces. I mean, that would be utterly insane to try doing against a blue or green screen. It's like, what a mess that would be. But here, they talk about how it's actually an advantage because they do have all those surfaces around. So now it's reflecting in that helmet and it actually makes everything feel more real because of that. One of the interesting things that popped up was Hal Hickel, the animation director, talking about how it lets the different departments work in a traditional sense, like a non-blue green screen sense, where everyone is there at the same time because everyone can see what's actually there. It allows the director of photography to actually shoot things and really get control back. Whereas you cede a lot of that control otherwise to post-production because you can't see for sure what those backgrounds are and how the lighting will affect different things. But here, you can. It allows people like set decoration to really work together because you gotta blend those backgrounds into the foreground and you can see it. Or hey, if there's something you need to fix, guess what? You can just go ahead and make that adjustment. Second unit shooting like Dave Filoni did a lot of, you can go set that volume up in 30 minutes and go take some of those extra second unit shots. I mean, dang. And the actors talked about how much they absolutely loved it as well. I mean, I've certainly heard about the pain in the ass that it is working against green screen. Because you have to imagine everything. The more green screen there is, the less you know what's really going on. And have you ever seen somebody react at the wrong time when you're watching something and it's a special effect? Well, yeah, that's a pain too, because you don't know exactly when it's happening. And it's even worse when you have multiple people in a scene, because they've all got to somehow react at the same time, assuming something is in the same spot, yet none of them can see it. Now, there are ways of getting around that to some degree, but it's only to some degree. Whereas with this, you can see it all. It's actually there at the same time, which means all the actors are there in the same spot. They see the same thing, so we have the same idea of what it is we're looking at. As Carl Weathers said, you don't have to pretend anymore. You're already there. Or like Carl Weathers going, I just didn't want to fall over into the lava. Oh, I love it. I mean, it's just great. And one last piece that this show talked about before we get out of here, where they talked about how this was like George's garage, and that was kind of the phrase being used, because George Lucas had talked about how eventually you'd be able to just shoot in your garage as if you were anywhere else, and it would be just as real as being thousands of miles away and shooting in Tunisia. And Kathleen Kennedy talked about how George had been trying to build that down at the Skywalker Ranch and hadn't been able to get there, and how George Lucas is always like 10 years ahead, and this was something he had been working on and couldn't quite get to. And for anyone who's not aware, Star Wars, throughout all of George Lucas working on it, always pushing technology forward. In the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, it's just one of those things that has long been something he has pushed, and it's impressive what we have because of George Lucas. And hey, this isn't going to stop here, because that technology, nothing is proprietary about it, which means other people can start do it, which means the directors that come in can then take their knowledge out elsewhere. We're going to see a lot more of this popping up, because it makes so much more possible. Such giant, cool environments that you just couldn't do. Certainly not for any kind of cheap budget, that's for sure. And so, I mean, dang, it just is, wow. This technology is fucking cool. And hey, I'm just so excited about it. I would love to just be in a room with that technology. And I've got to imagine it would be amazing to be an actor in a production using the volume as well. I loved this episode. I mean, I geek out about technology, so I expected I'd love it anyway, and I sure as heck did. I'd take a full documentary that got a bit more into the nitty-gritty, where we see how it all works too, and see the environments being built. Although, in fairness, I do suppose all that does exist in a sense, as you can see many of these different components in other steps of production, say in video games or in certain other movies. Because part of what was really cool here is how it was all combined and worked in a way that no one's seen before. That wasn't necessarily possible all that long ago, really. But now look at this. And on a TV show production too, this isn't a movie. So much lower budget, relatively speaking. And now look at that. We've got the air to rear projection. The camera's finally free to move and everyone can see what's actually happening right there where they're shooting. Just wow. Well, I could go on, but I think I'll stop. So what are we looking forward to next week? Apparently we're going to head the opposite direction. So no more of the special effects in the volume because it's called practical. So we're looking at practical effects next week, which means I'm assuming we're going to go ahead and be able to look forward to seeing some baby Yoda. But as far as this episode, tell me, what about you? What did you think of the volume? Did it blow you away? Let me know if you were as impressed as I was down below in the comments. And thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a like, share it with other people who do too, and don't forget to click that subscribe button if you haven't. And don't forget to come on back tomorrow for another new episode of Freeform Disney. Have a magical day, and may the Force be with you always.